Hello, I'm Teresa Malloy, the city's budget manager, and this is the presentation for the budget update. I will be conducting the first part of this presentation, and the second part will be done by Jim Golden, Director of Finance and Support Services. The city uses a basic fund accounting practice in its budgeting and accounting procedures that conform to best practices and standards in order to demonstrate financial accountability to the citizens. It is based on the concept that certain types of revenues should be used only for certain types of expenses. This is done by establishing separate funds by fund category in the financial system. This slide lists the three categories of funds. Each source of revenue is recorded in one of these funds, and expenses are reported against the revenue in that fund. The city does not budget for fiduciary funds. A complete list of the funds that are included in the annual budget can be found under the Budget Process and Policies tab of the budget document. The city's budget process begins in March and April of each year, with staff updating projects in the capital improvement program and putting together their budget requests for the following year. The framework for our process comes from the municipal charter as well as the city's adopted financial policies. The complete charter sections pertaining to the budget development and management can be found in Attachment A of the Council communication from May 1. The first few requirements determine the timing of the process. Section 9.2 states that the city manager will present the proposed budget to council on or before September 1st. Since this rarely falls on a Tuesday, council will usually receive the proposed budget and CIP during the last council meeting in August. The city historically has held a total of three public hearings on the proposed budget and CIP, the first happening on or before October 1st, the second at the council meeting following that, and the third during the second reading of the budget ordinances. Council adopts the budget and makes appropriations by ordinance. While the charter states that this must be completed by December 15th, the city has usually completed this in October. Also in October, council will fix the tax levies by ordinance or resolution. One ordinance for the city's tax levy, one for the DDA levy, and a resolution for the GID levy. Section 9.4 of the charter details the scope of the budget, including the requirement that expenditures must be at the line item level. Section 9.3 states that at the end of the year, all appropriations revert back to the fund balance from the fund in which they came. That was Section 9.12. Section 9.13 gives council the ability to make additional appropriations throughout the year, the biggest of which will happen in April, and that will include the carryover of funds from the prior year for projects and services that were authorized but not completed in that prior year. The city's financial policies are updated each year by staff and presented to council during the budget discussions in September, which are then adopted by resolution in October. The city currently has 103 policies in 8 categories. Each has a policy statement followed by an implementation statement. I'm going to highlight just a few that play a key role in the annual budget process. The first of these gets back to the idea of having the separate funds to account for all revenues and expenses of the city, where each fund has its own dedicated revenue source or sources. An important policy and also a state statute is that the council must adopt a balanced budget. The city takes the approach that ongoing expenditures will be covered with ongoing revenues, and that fund balances are used to fund capital and one-time expenditures. The city currently has about $540,000 in the general fund of ongoing expenses that are covered with one-time revenues. You're going to hear a bit more about this from Jim later in the presentation. Another policy that's key in the development of the budget is this policy. And this policy covers the allocation of the 2 cents of undedicated sales and use tax between the general fund and the public improvement fund. This is only the undedicated tax and does not pertain to the sales and use tax that goes into the street fund, the open space fund, or the public safety fund. Each year, council will analyze this split and set it by policy. You're also going to hear more about this one a little later from Jim as well. The final policy that I wanted to highlight for you this afternoon is the employee pay. This policy states that the city will strive to establish market ranges for pay for city positions. This is done by our HR division using salary surveys to identify the market ranges. These market ranges are then used to develop pay rates that are then incorporated into the annual budget process. The complete financial policies can be found in the city's annual budget document. In 2009, during the council retreat that year, council directed staff to implement a prioritization process for the general fund. It was a multi-step process that included 3 separate opportunities for citizen involvement. City Council chose to utilize the strategic policy directions that had been identified through the focus on Longmont, as well as the outcomes from the community budget forums that were held in the spring of 2008, to develop this list of results. General fund services were then costed out and separated between those services delivered directly to the public, which are the first 5 on this list, and governance services, which are those that provide internal support. Staff then scored the city services in regards to their influence in achieving each of these results, as well as some basic attributes. The resulting values, along with the relative priority assigned by a community involvement survey, resulted in an overall score for each service. The end result is 2 prioritization lists, one for services provided directly to the community and one for internal services that could be used to make decisions on allocation or reduction of budgeted resources. While these prioritization lists were not ultimately used to help balance the budget in 2010, staff continues to update the cost of general fund services and produce updated prioritization lists based on budgeted costs each year, and these are presented to City Council as part of the budget process. I'm now going to turn this presentation over to Jim.
Hi, I'm Jim Golden, Director of Finance Support Services. And now that Teresa's given you an update on the budget practices and policies, I'm going to give you a financial update and look at the results from 2011 to see how they position us for the 2013 budget process. My focus here is going to be on the general fund and the public improvement fund. Those are the 2 funds where we have the most competition for the dollars because there's a multitude of services that rely on those 2 funds for resources, and their dollars are not earmarked for specific purposes. So first here is a comparison of our general fund balance at the end of 2010 on the left and at the end of 2011 on the right column. And as you can see, the 2010 year-end available fund balance was $2.647 million. And that is our beginning point for putting together our budget for one-time expenses in the general fund. And after the adjustments or projections that we made for revenue that would be generated in excess of budget in 2011 and expense savings in 11, we came up with a one-time expenses for the 2012 budget of a little over $3.5 million. Part of that $3.5 million was a transfer from the general fund to the public improvement fund of $266,300 to fund one-time expenses out of that fund. So in 2011, We are beginning with an available fund balance at the, at the end of 11, where we have an available fund balance of $1,459,000. So already in 2012, though, we have taken some actions that have reduced that amount. We don't commonly do this, but earlier this year we did use fund balance of over $225,000 to pay for the moving of the museum artifacts from the Main Street storage facility. And also we had to use a little over $50,000 of fund balance in order to pay the accrued sick and vacation payout for the former city manager. So we used $281,000 already in 2012, so that reduces our available fund balance down to $1,178,000 in the general fund. So because of the lower amount of that beginning fund balance, it's less one-time expenses opportunity in the 2013 general fund budget, and so therefore we are less likely to be able to transfer dollars from the general fund to the public improvement fund in 2013. Now, as Teresa pointed out, the general fund and the public improvement fund share the 2% non-earmarked sales and use tax, and the allocation has varied over the years, but for the past 3 years now, from 2010 through 2012's budgets, it's been 88.3% allocated to the general fund and 11.7% allocated to the public improvement fund. That's been a year-to-year commitment that's been made in the budget process by the City Council. So what we have been doing, planning beyond that first year commitment, is that the allocation is assumed that it would return to a 15% allocation to the public improvement fund rather than 11.7%. So here on the public improvement fund slide, you see that in our 2012 through 2015 CIP, we have the year 2013, year 2, showing that we are assuming 15% of that sales tax to be going to the public improvement fund. That gives a projected funding of $4,444,000 of use taxes to the PIF. And in addition to that, we had projected a carryover of fund balance of $188,000, allowing us to fund expenditures of, we have only funded expenditures of $4,366,000 in the 2013 CIP. So that was the plan. As we start to move now towards 2013 being the next year, given that we do have another tight year coming up with revenue in the general fund, we are beginning with the assumption that it may be not able for us to put 15% of that 2% towards the public improvement fund. We may have to keep that at the 11.7% allocation for the public improvement fund as we've been using for the past 3 years. If that is the case, the taxes in the public improvement fund in 2013 would be $3,577,000. We do have a certain amount of carryover from 2011 in the public improvement fund because our use tax did come in stronger than expected last year. Our tax is off to a strong start this year, and we're making modest projections early on here for this year and next, but we think we may be able to carry dollars over as well from this year that will be in excess of our budgeted projections. So hopefully our carryover will be in the neighborhood of $700,000 or greater available for the 2013 budget. If that's the case, we'll have $4,277,000 available for expenditures. And as that matches up to our funded expenditures from the CIP of $4,366,000, it's a less than $100,000 difference, which could still be made up by a difference in projections based on how our use tax comes in during 2012. So I do want to point out, though, that of these amount of expenditures, $2.7 million are for debt service bond payments that are made out of the Public Improvement Fund. So budget challenges that we're facing in 2013's budget process. There's two major challenges that we've identified in previous budgets, and they still exist. Point them out again today. We don't want to overdo it, but the allocation of 2% sales and use tax is always a challenge. As long as we're keeping it at the level we're at, it's going to have an impact on both funds. And the difference between the allocation at 11.7% versus 15% for the Public Improvement Fund, it's a difference of $949,000 in 2012 budget dollars. So that's something that is continuing to cause a struggle for us to be able to try to continue to fund expenditures out of that Public Improvement Fund at the lower funded level. The second challenge here is the use of general fund balance to fund operating type expenditures. And we have 540,000 of those type of expenses in the 2012 budget. And those are all included in this slide here. And most of those are expenditures for a number of different programs out of the community services area. And also there are two large amounts out of our natural resources division. That includes contracted tree maintenance for $100,000 and right-of-way operations maintenance for $85,000. But again, as a total, this is $540,000 of ongoing type expenses that we are using fund balances to pay. And given the low fund balance that we have available to us in 2013's budget process, we may be forced to decide whether this is truly just a one-year commitment for these type of services going forward. So some other challenges in the general fund are, these are identification of our projections of expenditures or revenue impacts that we'll be facing in the 2013 budget. Beginning with the Parks and Greenway maintenance fee, it does expire at the end of 2012, and that was amounting to $470,000 of budgeted revenue in our 2012 budget. Every 1% of a pay increase in the city's general fund is a cost increase of $415,000 to that fund. And in addition, there's a budgeted health benefit cost increase in our premiums that we are aware of already of 7%, and that's also amounts to $415,000 out of the general fund in 2013. Step pay increases that we're committed to for 2013 in our public safety department are a total of $130,000. We have promotions of master police officers that we're aware of that are unbudgeted at this point that will need to be added in 2013, and those cost $61,000. Our general employees retirement plan, our defined benefit pension plan, our investment portfolio activity in 2011 was just about a 1% loss in investment activity for the year. And so what we are currently evaluating our actuary report for the plan this year, and we will be able to project what our contribution requirement for the plan will be sometime at the end of the second quarter. Every 1% increase in the contribution from that plan or to that plan is $180,000 from the general fund. And a few years ago when we had much greater losses in our investment portfolio from that fund, we did have to increase that contribution 3%. So we'll know more what that percentage will be later towards the end of the second quarter. Every year we do have level 1 type expense increases, and those are the increasing costs in utilities or contracts that we're committed to that we're going to have to fund one way or the other. We have no choice in those regards, and we estimate those could be anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000 next year. And then finally, HATS, that's our Human Resources and Accounting Technology solution. We are currently reviewing proposals, and we'll be selecting a vendor later this year. We are so far able to identify that out of the general fund, we will need another $200,000 to $400,000 in order to fund this project. We did point out in the 2012 budget process that the dollars that we were including for this project was a starting point, and that we were expecting that we were going to need more in the future budgets. So the general fund share of that could be anywhere from $200,000 to $400,000 for purchase and implementation in 2013. Most of that is probably going to be one-time type expenses. A little bit about our revenues. In 2011, our sales and use tax revenue was almost $47.2 million, and that was our highest annual total of sales and use tax ever. So we reached a benchmark there. But actually in 2007, that was our previous high, and it was only 1% less than what we were at in 2011. So really that shows you that over the last 4 years, we've had such a drop due to the economic conditions, and it's taken its toll on our sales and use tax base and kind of set that revenue base back by 4 years or more. So the 2012 budget for our sales and use tax, it's actually 0.2% less than the 2011 actual total sales and use tax. So that's a good thing, because our our activity so far this year, excuse me, our sales and use tax actual activity this year is up 9.2%, but that's only for 2 months in 2012, and that could still change. We have 6.1% growth in our sales tax and a 27% growth in our use tax. The use tax will probably come down somewhat. A lot of that is coming from primary employer activity and also from building permit activity, and those have been quite high in the first 2 months of the year, and we do expect that to level off somewhat. So what we'll be doing as we move forward is making projections for what 2012 sales and use tax will end at, as well as what we might expect for 2013. At least at this point in time, for preliminary planning, we've been using 3% growth in 2012, as well as an additional 3% growth in 2013. If that is what we end up budgeting, that would provide us a new revenue of $1.6 million in the general fund at the current allocation between the general fund and the public improvement fund. And that would be new resources available for our 2013 budget that would be needed to meet all of those budget challenges that I had previously pointed out. So now I want to move into our general fund emergency reserves and reserve policy. First off, the state statute puts TABOR in place, and TABOR requires that the city have an emergency reserve of 3% of total fiscal year spending. That's a complicated calculation, fiscal year spending, but based on the 2011 revenues, that amounted to just over $3 million, and so that's the amount of our TABOR emergency reserve for 2012. We maintain that reserve in the city's general fund. The TABOR reserve has restrictions that limit its use and make it almost impossible for us to use. And if we were able to use it, it would have to be for a real disaster type emergency. But if any of that reserve were to be used, TABOR does require us to restore that by the end of the fiscal year. So in effect, it really makes it almost impossible for us to utilize that, since it has to be replenished by the end of the year anyway. For years, our reserve policy in the city's general fund was a simple 6% reserve, and that was inclusive of the amount that we set aside for TABOR. In 2007, when we changed that from 6% to an 8% reserve. And then again in 2010, we made another change to our reserve policy. At that time, we adopted a new policy with different components to it. Those prior policies, they did include the table reserve within the 6 and 8% limits. The current policy that we adopted in 2010 was created in consideration of the relative unavailability of that table reserve and also in consideration of new governmental accounting standards relating to reporting on fund balances. And also upon review of other policies of other cities and the Government Finance Officers Association's recommended best practices on reserves. So that recommended best practice is that governments should maintain an unrestricted general fund balance of no less than 2 months of regular general fund operating expenditures. I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. So the new financial policy was designed to address the maintenance of the table reserve, address the amount of the unrestricted fund balance, and also to set specified emergency reserves and stabilization reserves and use targets within the unrestricted fund balance. So on this slide, we show the three components of our general fund reserve policy. And the first component is the state-imposed table reserve requirement. I already pointed out that that's just over $3 million. Secondly is a commitment to emergencies, a city council imposed emergency reserve. That would be maintained at 8% of general fund operating expenditures. That's a goal over time. We're not at that right now, and I will show you where we're at here in a minute. And the last amount is the commitment to emergencies, and that's a city council imposed stabilization reserve. I should back up the commitment to emergency reserve. It can only be used for emergency situations such as natural disasters, acts of terrorism or war, widespread riots, or similar emergencies impacting the community. It can only be used in the event, it also can be used in the event of an inability to meet a scheduled debt service payment. It takes a supermajority of council for us to be able to appropriate use of those city council imposed emergency reserves. So the last component is the city council imposed stabilization reserve. And this reserve would be used during times of reduced revenue due to economic conditions to allow general fund services to continue to be provided throughout an economic downturn. Now this reserve is a range, and it's targeted at a minimum of 3% and a maximum of 8%. We don't currently have that reserve funded. We want to first fund the previous reserve, the emergency reserve, before we get to the stabilization reserve funding. So this here slide shows you where we're at currently on each of these reserve policy targets. The table reserve is currently a 4.9% amount of the general fund operating expenditures. It's that 3% fiscal year's spending calculation, and it's a little over $3 million. Emergency reserve target is 8%. It would be $4.89 million currently. And the stabilization reserve would be 3% to 8%, and that's anywhere from $1.8 million to another $4.9 million. So our total reserve target is 15.9% to 20.9% of our general fund operating expenditures. That's $9.75 million to $12.8 million. In 2012, moving into 2012, we have funded our table reserve, obviously, the 4.9%, and we have funded 5.9% of the emergency reserve, and that's $3.6 million. So our total funded reserves are $6.6 million, or 10.8%. So we've moved gradually, at a pretty good pace considering the economic conditions that we've gone through. We've moved from a 6% reserve in just 2007 to a 10.8% reserve already here in 2012. GFOA recommended best practice is that governments should maintain an unrestricted general fund balance of no less than 2 months of regular general fund operating expenditures. That's 16.67%. Our unrestricted fund balance includes the amounts that are committed to emergencies, but not the TABOR restriction, and also all other categories of fund balance that are either committed, assigned, or unassigned. So this best practice and the unrestricted fund balance, this is not in addition to the 3 components of our policy that I just talked about. This is another way of looking at it, and it's a common way for bond rating agencies to look at a city. So our total unrestricted fund balance in the general fund at the end of 2011 is 17.75% of 2012 general fund operating expenditures. So that is within the policy range of 2 to 3 months of 16.67% to 25%, and it's in excess of the 2-month recommendation best practice of the GFOA. So it would be considered to be in good position by the rating agencies. So we've made some very good progress with our reserve policies so far. It's going to be a little bit tougher moving forward because of the fact that we have less fund balance available to us to work with, but we are on a good target towards meeting this policy over time, and the council has made some good decisions about setting this in the past, so that hopefully we will be able to deal with any future economic downturns if and when they do occur. So that's the extent of our presentation today on the budget and financial update. Thank you.